In the spring of 1918, Germany unleashed the Kaiser Schlacht. At 4:40 in the morning on the 21st of March, 6,600 guns opened fire along a 50-mile front. In 5 hours, they fired over 1 million shells, a hurricane of steel that would reach 3.5 million rounds by nightfall. Every previous offensive had opened with a slow, grinding, week-long bombardment that announced itself days in advance. This was different. A perfectly synchronized storm, high explosives, tear gas, and lethal agents fired in precise sequence to blind command posts, cut telephone lines, and force British gunners to rip their gas masks off at exactly the wrong moment. Then, the Stormtroopers came through the fog, small teams, fast and low, visibility down to 10 feet. No massed waves, no upright advance into machine gun fire. Trained specifically for this, to probe for gaps, push through them, and keep moving. They didn't stop at fortified positions, they went around them. By the time the British defenders understood what was happening, German assault units were already miles behind the front, attacking artillery positions and command posts from directions that had never been designed to face infantry. The men in those teams carried a refined arsenal: satchel charges, stick grenades by the dozen in canvas sacks worn across the chest, portable flamethrowers, all of it blooded through years of trial at Verdun and the Somme. The standard components of a high-speed doctrine of violence. By the end of that first day, the British Fifth Army's front had collapsed across 40 miles. 38,500 casualties in a single day. 21,000 of them taken prisoner. For the first time in 3 years, the Western Front had truly moved. In 24 hours, the German infantry had achieved what millions of shells and hundreds of thousands of lives had failed to accomplish at the Somme or Passchendaele. The restoration of mobile war. Nothing in 3 years of industrial slaughter had produced anything like it. To understand how, you have to go back 47 years. The men who pulled that off didn't appear in 1918. The doctrine behind them didn't start in the trenches. It started in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and 71, in the gap between how Prussian junior officers responded when the plan stopped working and how their French counterparts froze. The French waited for orders. The Prussians made decisions. That single institutional difference, embedded into training and refined over the next 40 years, is the origin of everything you just saw. If you've watched the German Sergeant video, you already know what it produced in the Second World War. What you're about to see is what it looked like the first time it went to war at scale, and what 4 years of industrial attrition did to the men who carried it. By 1914, the Germans were conscripts facing the British Expeditionary Force, arguably the most professional standing army in Europe, every man a volunteer marksman. At the Battle of Mons, the professional riflemen of the BEF poured out a volume of fire so disciplined and rapid that it shattered German massed formations. Later legends would claim the Germans mistook it for machine gun fire. The reality was simpler. Britain's finest riflemen had just torn them apart, and they had no answer for it. One army had produced excellent soldiers. The other had produced soldiers who could think. What 1914 did was put that difference under the most brutal test imaginable. At Liège, in early August 1914, the first German assault on the Belgian fortress rings was thrown back with heavy casualties. Officers ordered frontal assaults that accomplished nothing except filling the casualty lists with names. But at the squad and platoon level, in the actions that don't appear in operational histories, the German infantry performed differently. When officers went down, squads reorganized. When a flanking route appeared, sergeants took it without waiting for orders. When a French position could be bypassed rather than attacked frontally, junior leaders made that decision in the field and executed it. At Le Cateau, in August 1914, German infantry units whose officers had been killed continued pressing an encirclement the the original orders hadn't specified, because the sergeants read the terrain, identified the opportunity, and executed without waiting for permission. The British escaped, but only barely. British and American after-action analysts documented the pattern repeatedly through the war. German small units continuing to operate purposefully after their officers were killed, in situations where comparable Allied units stopped and waited for direction. French doctrine in 1914 was built on a philosophical commitment to attack. L'offensive à outrance, offensive to the utmost. Artillery regulations explicitly stated that artillery does not prepare attacks, it supports them. The result was French infantry walking into prepared positions with insufficient fire support, in formations optimized for momentum rather than survivability, led by officers trained that hesitation was the primary tactical sin. The Germans made their own catastrophic errors in 1914. The mismanagement of the Schlieffenplan's right wing, the diversion of forces that blunted the hammer blow through Belgium, the communication failures at the Marne that cost Germany its best chance at a quick victory. At the individual infantry level, the doctrine held. When the war went into the ground in the autumn of 1914, the German army carried an institutional tool its enemies had to build from scratch. For 2 years, that tool held. Attrition does not distinguish between good soldiers and bad ones. It does not spare the men with the best training or the sharpest tactical instincts. By 1916, the German infantry that had entered the war with years of institutional depth behind it was being consumed by the Somme and Verdun at the same rate as everyone else. The casualty lists grew. Replacements arrived with less training than the men they replaced. The NCO cadre, the institutional engine of German tactical performance, was being destroyed faster than it could be rebuilt. The British were learning. The French were learning. The edge that had made German infantry so lethal in 1914 was narrowing as Allied armies adapted under the pressure of industrial warfare. The men who had built that doctrine were dying faster than they could be replaced. Could the institution outlast the war that was consuming it? If you're into deep analysis of both world wars, the economics, the institutions, the decisions that never make the textbooks, this is the channel for you. Now, back to the question. By 1915, small groups of German soldiers had stopped following orders and started running experiments. Working in the lethal confined spaces of the trench system, they were testing what actually worked. The German High Command had already made one attempt at formalizing assault tactics, authorizing the first experimental assault detachment under a major named Kalsow. It was sent to the Loreto front and decimated, losing nearly half its men and most of its guns. Kalsow's own after-action report blamed the failure on the assault cannons being fired from the rear like ordinary field pieces, their muzzle flashes spotted immediately by the French, who destroyed them with counter-battery fire. Willy Rohr took command in the autumn. He stripped away what hadn't worked, rebuilt around flank attacks by small flexible units, and integrated flamethrowers, machine guns, and mortars into a single combined system. On October 12, 1915, 6 squads from Assault Detachment Rohr attacked French positions at the Schretzmannle in the Vosges Mountains. Flamethrowers fired first. Grenades followed. Trench mortars and field guns suppressed French artillery while assault pioneers cleared the trench section by section. It worked. Rohr used that action as the template for everything that followed, and immediately started training other infantry units in the same methods. Then came Verdun. Rohr's unit fought alongside regular infantry in March 1916, and his after-action report identified a problem that had nothing to do with his own men. Soldiers who had never trained with grenades were leaving them lying in the woods, afraid to touch them. The weapon Rohr built his doctrine around was the stick grenade, the potato masher as Allied soldiers would come to call it. The long wooden handle wasn't decoration. It gave a soldier twice the throwing range of a British Mills bomb without needing a strong arm. In a narrow trench under fire, that distance was the difference between killing the enemy and killing yourself. Raw's assault pioneers knew exactly how to use a grenade. The rest of the army didn't. And inside a trench, that gap was lethal. The standard infantry rifle was nearly useless in that environment, too long to swing around a corner, too slow to reload. The grenade was purposefully built for close-quarter trench fighting, but pulling a pin, holding a live charge, throwing accurately while under fire, that required drilling until it became instinct. Most soldiers had never done that drill. Crown Prince Wilhelm gave Raw a direct mandate. Fix it. Train the entire army in modern close combat, the grenade as the primary offensive weapon supported by shorter carbines, flamethrowers, light mortars, and machine guns working together at the squad level. Raw established a full training ground at Doncourt, where thousands of officers learned to synchronize those arms into a single system. The result was the Stormtroopers. Their goal wasn't the trench, it was everything behind it. A Stormtrooper squad leader made rapid independent decisions, which direction to move, whether to bypass a position or hit it, how to exploit an opportunity the original orders never anticipated. The squad was built around that decision-maker, but the infantry doctrine was only half of it. In 1914, a German infantryman carried a Gewehr 98. Stormtroopers squads were built around something entirely different. The MG 0815. Heavier than the British Lewis gun at 39 pounds, water-cooled, capable of sustained suppressive fire that lighter Allied machine guns could not match. One element of the squad generated a base of fire with the MG while the grenade and satchel team closed and cleared. British and French formations in 1918 were still organized primarily around the bolt-action rifle, with Lewis guns or Chauchat light machine guns as supporting weapons. The Stormtroopers squad was organized around automatic suppression and close-quarters clearance, built for the trench, not the open field. These tactics are sometimes called Hutier tactics, after General Oskar von Hutier, who applied them at Riga in 1917. But the name misattributes the credit. The real architects were Major Rohr, who built and tested the assault battalion concept from 1915 onward, and Colonel Georg Bruchmüller, who designed the artillery system that made the infantry's job possible. Von Hutier applied their work. Rohr and Bruchmüller built it. French captain André Lafargue had theorized bypassing strong points in a pamphlet as early as 1915. The Germans institutionalized what the French theorized, building the machinery to train every NCO in the army to execute it. In September 1916, Ludendorff visited Crown Prince Wilhelm's headquarters and saw Rohr's men for the first time. Soldiers in steel helmets and leather knee patches, armed in a way he had never seen on the Eastern Front. On October 23rd, he ordered every army on the Western Front to create its own assault battalion modelled on Rohr's. One unit's experiment became army-wide doctrine in a single order. Now, none of this works without the artillery. And what Bruchmüller did to artillery in this war is one of the most underappreciated revolutions in military history. Every offensive for 3 years had opened the same way. Days of sustained bombardment, registering guns with ranging shots, announcing the attack to every defender within earshot. Bruchmüller eliminated it. Using the Pulkowski method, mathematical tables that accounted for barometric pressure, wind speed, muzzle velocity, and even the varying thickness of each shell's steel casing, German batteries could achieve pinpoint accuracy without firing a single warning shot. The British had no idea what was coming until it was already landing on them. And the gas sequence Bruchmüller designed was ruthless in a way that still reads as shocking a century later. Blue Cross shells didn't contain gas in the conventional sense. They contained diphenyl chloroarsine, a fine arsenic dust engineered to penetrate the particulate filters of British gas masks. The sneezing fit it induced was so violent it caused vomiting, forcing soldiers to tear their masks off. Immediately following came Green Cross shells. Lethal phosgene, a mechanical hack of the human body. The mask designed to save a soldier's life was turned into the instrument of his death. The psychological shock was absolute. By August 1918, Hugo Schmeisser's MP-18 had reached the front, the first submachine gun purpose-built for infantry assault, the perfect weapon for the infiltration doctrine. But it arrived in a dying army. Tactical excellence could no longer compensate for a nation that had reached its breaking point. Operation Michael, 21st of March, 1918. Russia had left the war in 1917, allowing Germany to transfer nearly 50 divisions from the Eastern Front. But the American Expeditionary Force was arriving in France in growing numbers, and by summer 1918, the Allied manpower advantage would be decisive and permanent. The offensive had to achieve a strategic decision before that window closed, or Germany would lose the war by attrition. Divisions moved at night, horses with hooves wrapped in cloth, fires forbidden, reconnaissance aircraft constantly chasing away British observation planes. The British had almost no warning. When the bombardment hit, machine gunners couldn't see their fields of fire. Command posts went dark. Telephone lines went down within minutes. The British defensive system was paralyzed within the first hour. By the end of that first day, 21,000 British soldiers were taken prisoner, isolated, bypassed, cut off from any command structure that could tell them what to do. The British had actually adopted the German system of defense in depth, the same layered zone model Germany had used in 1917. The problem was manpower. They lacked the troops to man it properly, and the fog of March 21st turned their sophisticated zones of fire into isolated islands of chaos. The offensive stalled, and the reason went deeper than Allied reserves plugging the gap. Operation Michael was the first of 4 separate offensives Germany launched that spring, Georgette in April, then Gneisenau and Blücher-York in May and June. Each one intended to exploit or redirect what the previous one had started. None had a fixed final objective. Ludendorff was chasing tactical success and hoping strategic opportunity would emerge from it. It didn't. The German army had no trucks. Their supply columns were horse-drawn, and as the Stormtroopers advanced, they crossed the old Somme battlefield, ground pulverized by millions of shells since 1916, churned into a lunar landscape that horses could barely cross. The elite infantry outran their food, their water, and their ammunition. The doctrine of speed was murdered by the terrain it had to cross to succeed. By the time the 4 offensives had spent themselves, Germany had inflicted enormous casualties and taken 239,000 of its own that it had no way to replace. The war continued for another 8 months before Germany collapsed under the combined weight of Allied industrial power, the naval blockade, and American divisions arriving faster than the shock troops could destroy them. German infantry doctrine was built in Prussian military academies in the 1870s and 80s, refined after Sedan, codified into doctrine that demanded independent judgment from the lowest ranks, trained into an NCO corps that could execute it when the officers were gone. 4 years of war stripped everything unsustainable and forced it to evolve into something its designers never anticipated. The Stoßtruppen were the tradition at its logical endpoint, but the concentration came at a cost. Only around a quarter of the German army were elite attack divisions. The rest were trench divisions, progressively hollowed out as the best men were combed out for the assault battalions. A German medical officer captured the divide in one observation. The men of the Storm battalions, he wrote, were treated like football stars. They lived in comfortable quarters, travelled to the playing ground in buses, did their jobs, and disappeared, leaving the poor foot soldiers to dig in, endure the counterattacks, and absorb the avenging artillery fire of the enemy. 2 classes of soldier. one army. Tactical excellence, however refined, could not overcome the strategic and industrial balance against it. March 1918 was the best the German infantry ever performed. Germany lost the war 8 months later. Did the German experience across both world wars settle it permanently? Or is there a level of tactical excellence that changes the math? Drop your answer below. Subscribe if this changed how you think about what actually makes an army dangerous. Thanks for watching.